All right, welcome to part two of our ZScream Zelda Link to the Past editing tutorial. And on this episode, we will be going over dungeons and some of the things that you should know before getting into building a dungeon to avoid causing yourself any issues. So first thing I'm going to go over is the concept of rooms versus entrances. So in the game, you have on this side over here shows all the rooms in the game. You can click this box here to preview the room. So you have all the rooms here. These ones down here are like houses and caves and small things, and these are like main dungeons and houses and whatnot. So over on this side, you have entrances. So the entrances, these numbers on the left side here, are the entrances IDs, and they correspond to the room numbers, which are over here. So like Link's house, room 104. You can click on Link's house, room 104, and there it is. And so entrances are what are used on the overworld to enter a room. And entrances are a really sensitive kind of entity, but they're pretty simple once you know how they work. So the entrance ID here, when you right click an entrance in the overworld, corresponds to that list in the dungeon editor. And you could double click to easily go into an entrance. Now on this side you have entrance properties, and these can seem kind of complicated, but a lot of them you can ignore for the most part. The most important ones are these up here. So the room ID that corresponds to the entrance, the dungeon ID if it's one of the main game dungeons, the song that you want to play corresponds to a song ID, and then the block set. And the block set's important because if you see over here, I have this graphics group set editor open. So this is something that's also available in the graphics manager tab. Although since I have it popped out, it's right here. And this is really important, and I would recommend using the window tab to pull up your graphics group manager while you're working on dungeons. And palette editor too can be useful, but we're not going to go over that today. But graphics group editor is important to have because the block set ID is in multiple places and has kind of multiple different situational meanings, so to speak. So entrance block set is loaded, when you go through an entrance. But there's also room block sets that are kind of important because these happen. These are like the graphics that are loaded on top of the main block set. So you see how this has like 8 sheets, and this has 4, but they're corresponding. Oh, here's the walls there. They're right there. So inside of the dungeon, these room block sets, they correspond. They're both accessed and used during different parts. Like, for example, the main block set is only reloaded on warp, stairs, hole. So let's say you tried to like change the block set between rooms that just have doors. It's not going to work. You're going to need to have some sort of, like it says, stairs or warp to change the block set. Um, and so that is also a part of the entrance. And the other thing that's important is this entrance position with mouse. So let's say you wanted to change like where the door is on an entrance. I'm not gonna go through like all of the work of like building a new room, but let's say you just wanted to change where the entrance is. Like you clear out a bunch of stuff here. You clear out objects when you have these layer tools. Now, let's say you want to move the exit. The this box you see here, this is the entrance camera, and this entrance camera is really important because it kind of influences the collision and the camera. So if the camera or if the box isn't set up correctly, you can walk into the door and the scrolling for the walls will be incorrect. Sprites may not appear. There's a lot of things that can go wrong when this happens. And with the view thing, you can turn off this entrance camera box, but it's important to know that this is here and to use it. So you can set entrance position with mouse, and you should put this little star here, or this little plus, just slightly offset to the left, and it'll automatically configure all these camera properties for you to fix this entrance. And this is really useful, and most people's issues stem from not using this feature properly for entrances. And another important thing, even though I said to ignore this, these X-Y axis scrolling and the quadrants are important as well, because there are certain entrances, for example, where there is no scrolling. You just walk into a single quadrant, and you don't want to be able to walk up to the wall and see this other empty room. So these are pretty self-explanatory, I think. If you have like a long layout, you want to use like your y-axis. If you got like this, you want to use the x-axis, and start with whatever quadrant that you set your camera up in. So I think that's most of kind of what goes on with these entrances. There's also this layer 2 box, so if you put your entrance on a lower layer, for example, I'm trying to think of like certain caves that actually use the lower layer entrance. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure, but that kind of gets into the concept of layering, so I'll kind of hold off on getting too deeply into that. But earlier I referred to the stuff that I deleted as objects, so I guess let's switch course and talk about objects. So objects are basically everything on the screen that doesn't move and isn't part of the default layout. Layouts being the 4-quadrant default that you can set, which has like objects built into it, but you can't change them outside of this number here. So objects are pretty easy to work with on the surface level, but they have a lot of nuances to them that are important to know when it relates to like layering. But for the most part, it really is kind of straightforward to just place them. But there's a few things to keep in mind about objects in particular when it relates to block sets. In the vanilla game, there are certain collision tile type configurations that are associated per block set. And so this can mean something like, let me think of an example here. I guess even like the water, like these water tiles in the sewers, those have like a special tile type associated with them that when Link interacts with it, it knows he's swimming. And certain block sets may not have the collision set up where that graphic is. I'm actually trying to think of a better example. Oh, here's a good one. The moving water in particular. This has a special collision type where if it's in a different block set, it's not going to, it could be blocked. Because, for example, in a different dungeon, it's used for some other object. So, in situations like that, where you made a fancy dungeon, you changed the block set, but you still wanted to make access of this certain collision type, there is the custom collision mode, which basically lets you put down a specific tile type that you want, like the moving water, without having to change the internal mapping of those collision types. And so it zooms in for you a bit and allows you to just type individual collision types. And this can be kind of tedious, but it's also very useful. Like I said, if you don't want to change those internal collision mappings, but you did end up changing the block set while wanting to make use of a certain, type of collision, or you wanted like an invisible floor. So this can be very useful when you find yourself hitting kind of a wall with the capability of your objects. So also in this view menu, when you're using the custom collision, has a 2x zoom, so you can zoom out of that. Something else worth going over is like all of the objects that support variable size, you can scroll with your mouse wheel, which is pretty handy. And they all have this concept of like, so there's layers, which are kind of like an abstraction, and then there's actually like the Z position of the object. So even though this object is on layer 1, you can decrease the Z and it'll appear behind this thing. But that's different than it being on layer 2, which then I can't access with the layer 2 selector. So I guess I will find this room I was thinking of. So this is a good example showing off some basic layer 2 and layered things going on. So we'll break this down a bit. You have this, when you hide layer 1, you can see everything that the game considers to be layer 2. And you can select these objects down here. So these are the things that are beneath the layer 1 objects that make it so that when Link's walking underneath there, there's some collision that prevents him from going, outside of that space. But these other things are actually on layer 1, which is kind of strange at first. You would think that these lower walls go on layer 2, but because of these layer 2 masks, these are a special object. And there's a couple different variants of it, but these layer 2 masks, essentially, you place them over a space, and they allow you to show the layer 2, and this is influenced by the layer 2 type. And there's a lot that goes on with these, which is more than I could cover in this video, but I would say best thing to do is always to reference the vanilla game, keep a copy of the Link to the Past vanilla open, and look at how it accomplishes things when it comes to these layering techniques. You can see here, layered OAM. In this scenario, the layering is because of these bridges that Link walks under. We're using the layer masks. We have our lower objects placed with layer 1. We have our hidden collision objects placed with layer 2. Now there's an alternative to this, which is merged layers. So you look at this, one of the first caves that you see in Link to the Past, and it almost looks like it's 2 layers. But when you're in this cave, it's like a dark room, technically, and when you have the layer 2 dark room on, you can't have like a lower layer. That's not a concept, because the layer 2 is being used to mask the lighting, show the kind of darkness, handle the torches and whatnot. So here what we have actually is a merged layers. So this up here and this here, those are the same floor. If they were separate layers, you could change the floor graphics like this, and you could see that that masked area is a different floor graphic. Whereas here, changing that floor does nothing, because these are merged layers. And these stairs are very important, and it's very easy to get these stair objects wrong. So, layers, you see here, we have inter-room stairs and the inter-room stairs, separate layers, and merged layers. This is very important. So if you have a room like this, where everything is on one layer, and you just want to simulate the illusion of a second layer, it's dark, or you're using some other layering effect, you use these merged layer stairs. This is important. But if you're using 2 separate layers, and you have this masking on, then you want to use these separate layer stairs. And let me see, what else do I have? Something else I guess worth considering. So sprites. This is a little self-explanatory, but it's still worth going into some of the things you can do with the sprites. These are based on sprite sets, which We bring back up our graphics group. These correspond to this. But as you can read here, sprite block set used on overworld and dungeon, but beware, 0 to 40 can only be used on overworld. Since the dungeon sprite set starts at 40, your dungeon room is using 6, here it is 46. So you gotta always like factor that in. So here, if our sprite set is 8, it's actually 48. And then we can use our palettes tab to look at what sprites we have in this room. So that's something that you should know. If you ever get confused, you're like, I typed in 8 and it doesn't look right. There's the note there, but it can be a little confusing. So you can see what sprites you have in there, change the sheets, and that influences which sprites you have access to looking correctly. And if you select a sprite, you can change what layer is on. So say I wanted to move this Stalfos down there, I can send it to layer 2. And it's indexed by 0. So here it says layer 01, but now that Stalfos will appear down there and be able to move, which is really nice. So sprites I don't think are super complicated, but another thing I think people get really confused with are these doors. Doors are tough. Doors are very tough, especially in these merge layers. But for the most part, if, like I said, you follow the way that the vanilla game does it, you shouldn't have any problems. But again, easier said than done. So like these lower layer doors, these use a normal door, layer 2, combined shutter. Really what's more important is that it has these collision areas here. Since the door is technically lower on this door grid, as you can see, you can move the door to a bunch of different positions. And I have the layer 2 off. Oh, here's another good example of these layer 2 doors in the castle. So you have this to kind of guide Link through the next room with that door, for these lower layer doors. So yeah, with these, it's very much like you want to make sure the mask is there so that the door doesn't get cut off, because if the door is on the special layer 2 and the mask isn't over it, it's not going to appear correctly. Versus, let's see, turn that off. Exits, those have a special door, special kind of door. So for example, this layer 2 exit has two doors underneath it. The 12, hex 12. This is another thing you gotta keep in mind, is that a lot of the values in this program are in hexadecimal. So it's good to keep a programmer's calculator open so you can convert values, and a normal door layer 2. So that's pretty common for the lower layers. Upper layers usually have these decorative dungeon entrances. Same kind of thing where you want to make sure that you properly set up the camera if that's the room or the entrance that you're editing. Another thing to keep in mind is that special doors. So this concept of special doors is shutter doors, key doors, big key doors. You can only have up to 4 of those per room, and they correspond to like the tags. So these tags, like, oh, I have a shutter door in the northwest room, you kill all the enemies, it opens, as well as like the stairs. These special, all these concepts are special. You can only have up to 4 of those. You can have 16 sprites per room. You can have 6 chests, up to 6 chests per room. And the concept of special tiles, which includes things like the pots, the pegs, the star tiles, the leave the chests, those all can also up to be 16 per room. So after 16 of those special tiles, if you have too many of pots, pegs, chests, star tiles, they just won't work anymore. Some of the additional ones will not register. So if you ever have issues where you can't pick up a pot that you placed, it's because you placed too many special objects. Same with, having issues with certain shutter doors not working. You want to make sure that the full quadrant that you're in doesn't have too many of these special kind of conditions, you may have to move into another quadrant in order to achieve what you want there. Another thing worth going over is these dungeon properties. This is the room numbers that correspond to where the pendants drop and the crystals drop. And these are actually in decimal, so you'll want to convert these from decimal to hexadecimal to correspond with the rooms where the crystal drops are supposed to happen. That's really useful. But another thing that's a little less obvious is the ZS properties window over here. This is good for keeping track of the limitations, how many rooms you've used, the room objects that you've placed, pots, sprites, heart pieces if you're having trouble keeping track of them, and so on and so forth. So this is really handy. It's under Dungeon. This is ZS properties. Another good one, it's pretty handy as well, is the Advanced Chest Editor. So this lets you edit what items come from the chest, what palette, what graphics they use. So if you want to change the prizes that you give and you want the actual sprite that comes out of the chest to be different, this is really handy. Let's see what else. Oh, this is a really neat feature. So if you hold control and you double click on these rooms, they'll have this little outline here. And then you press this button up here. It says tour mode in big, but this is actually like a print picture. So this will print like a picture inside the ZScream folder, and that will, you can just export your dungeon, which is nice. Another thing too, blocks and torches, those are also their own kind of special designated object. So keep that in mind with the limits. So let's see, we've gone over custom collision right here. We've gone over the chest editor. Oh, this is a little thing that I kind of noticed. Let's see, let me find an example for this too. These shutter doors. So let's say you got this one right here. Shutter door both side. There's this concept of both side shutter doors, and then there's trap bottom and trap top. So if you're inside of a room, you can have these trap top and trap bottom doors, but you should only use these inside of a room. So if you feel like you need to, because if you look up in this room, this is an open door. If you feel like you need to specify when you place this door here that it's a trap top or a trap bottom and the other one's going to be open, don't do that. It's not necessary. This is only a concept within the quadrants of the rooms, at least in my experience. As you can see here, this says both sides, but clearly in the other room, it's not both sides. So you don't have to worry about that. And also here's another good example of a different kind of staircase. So we have like the, where are they at? You have these staircases right here. Those go up into the next room in this rotational kind of thing. Whereas this goes up into the room that's connected to it. Or if you set one of these special stair properties, you can have it connect to some other room. But in this case, we have it connecting straight up that way, like that. Whereas this, if it was to connect to the next room, you would want to check this XY property here, 2E04, and place your downstairs at 2E04, versus this, which connects almost like a door transition, but with the added benefit of changing the floor indicator that you're on, which is nice. Another thing worth pointing out that a lot of people end up messing up is that the let's see, can I show the grid? Yeah, it does work. Okay, so the transport tiles, warp, is that what it is? Yeah, these only work when they're like properly aligned on the grid. So sometimes people will place these incorrectly and then be like, oh, my warp isn't working. It has to be along the grid. believe it's the 16 by 16 grid. Yeah, so it has to be placed along the grid properly. If it's in some goofy place, only like a corner of it will work. The detection's just not great. So it's good to use the grid sometimes for certain things like that where they have more precise hitbox detection. Let's turn that off. And really just in general, exploring all these view settings is really useful. Like just hiding layers can reveal a lot about a room when you're kind of studying the original and trying to make something happen, trying to accomplish something. There's a lot of different tags. I could go over more things in general, but I feel like I'm starting to get a little long-winded here. So I think in a future tutorial, what I want to talk about is probably custom objects, custom sprites, managing assembly, and I guess if people have more questions about dungeons, if something wasn't clear, feel free to leave that in the comments. I can revisit dungeons if I didn't go over anything. I'm pretty sure I've covered everything. Oh, there is a limit on the amount of pit damage tile rooms that you can have. So rooms that have pit damage, you can't have like a ton of these. So there's a limit on that. Be mindful of that limit. What else? I think that might actually be everything. So at the risk of taking this on too much longer, be sure to check out the Oracle of Secrets trailer if you're interested in beta testing. There's a link to my Discord on the trailer video. Check that out. And yeah, this has been ZScream. Link to the past for ROM hacking. Scoffle out.